He shouldn't have lived through it. A German Shepherd pup, maybe 8 weeks old, sun-scorched, parched, and lashed to a Joshua tree in the middle of a desert storm that could peel paint off steel. Yet somehow, when the wind finally died, the tiny creature still drew breath. But he wasn't alone. 2 other pups lay beside him, motionless and quiet. Then came the boots. 3 Marines, off course and worn to the bone, trudged through the gale in faded desert camo, men carrying ghosts in their eyes. They thought they'd stumbled on strays to rescue. But the truth was, those dogs would rescue them first. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you believe that loyalty is born in the most broken places, hit subscribe. Because this story will change the way you see courage. The desert outside Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, was not built for mercy. By noon, the heat could melt the soles off boots. The air itself bit and burned, sharp, dry, alive with hostility. That afternoon, the temperature climbed past 122 degrees Fahrenheit. The horizon rippled like molten glass, dust rose in curtains, and the ground split in webs of thirst. Staff Sergeant Micah, Hawk, Redford, 38, drove the lead Humvee. Broad shoulders, weathered skin, eyes squinting as if he stared into something too bright for anyone else to see. His fatigue cap sat low, his voice, when he used it, rolled like quiet thunder. He'd earned the name Hawk years earlier after spotting an ambush before it struck, saving a man's life in the dark. But his sharpness wasn't just training. It was survival. Beneath the armor was a silence born of loss. His father, a decorated K-9 officer, had died when Hawk was 10, shot in a botched drug bust. Hawk never cried. He'd buried his grief in the memory of Ace, the family's German shepherd who, months later, took a bullet during a home invasion to protect him. Ace hadn't survived, but Hawk did. And that was the debt he carried. Behind him, Corporal Taylor Briggs, 29, handled the comms. Lean, focused, with the look of a man who'd seen more than he said. He spoke little, smiled less, and could fix any broken machine like it was breathing life into a friend. The son of 2 grease-stained mechanics from rural Arkansas, Taylor had joined the Corps not for glory, but to disappear into something larger than himself. In the back sat Private First Class Noah Lair, 23, sweat soaking through his undershirt as he hummed softly under his breath. Freckled, brown curls poking from beneath his helmet, too young looking to fit the uniform. The newest Marine in the unit. He was earnest to a fault, raised in Vermont by his grandmother after his parents fell apart, his mother gone, his father drowned in a bottle. Noah loved animals, carried worn paperbacks in his pack, and had the kind of heart that still believed kindness could win. The 3 were heading back from a brutal 4-day survival drill when the world turned on them. It began as a whisper. A twitch in the air, a flicker along the edge of vision. Then the sky collapsed. Sand wall coming from the west, Hawk muttered, watching the horizon vanish. Damn it, Taylor hissed. No warning. None. Hawk's knuckles whitened around the wheel. We find shelter, now. The Humvee bucked against the gusts, the frame groaning as sand tore at it like claws. Visibility dropped to 10 feet. The GPS blinked out. Hawk cursed under his breath, steering off-path toward a ridge he'd memorized days ago. It's like the sky's bleeding, Noah whispered, peering through the dust-smeared window. They pushed until the vehicle could go no farther. Ahead, a grove of twisted Joshua trees stood like crooked sentinels. Hawk slammed the Humvee into park. Out, he barked. Goggles on, wrap up. We're not dying in this tin can. The wind screamed as they stepped into it, scarves pulled tight, eyes stinging. Sand sliced at their skin like razors. And beneath the roar, a sound. A whimper. Noah froze. Did you hear that? Taylor shrugged. It's just wind. No, Hawk said, head tilted. The noise came again, faint, pleading. Over there. Noah pointed toward the largest tree. They staggered forward, bent against the storm. Its gnarled limbs reached for the sky like broken fingers. At its base, half buried in dust, were three small shapes, pups. German shepherds. Barely 7 weeks old. Their bodies trembled, bound by thick ropes digging into necks and bellies, crusted with sand and blood. "Jesus," Taylor muttered. Noah dropped to his knees, ripping off his gloves. "They're alive. I think they're alive." Hawk knelt beside him. The storm battered his back, but his hands moved gently. The nearest pup, dark-furred, one ear folded, lifted its head and met his eyes. In that instant, decades folded in on themselves. Hawk saw Ace again. The same look. The same wordless trust. "These weren't lost," Hawk murmured. "They were left." A torn scrap of notebook paper, half buried under a rock, confirmed it. Scrawled in shaky ink. "Can't keep them. Please don't hurt them." Noah worked the knots loose, whispering soft words. "This one's burning up." "Shoulders out on this one," Taylor said, examining another. "They've been here a while." "Then we get them out," Hawk ordered. They wrapped the pups in jackets and rucksacks, shielding them from the sand. The smallest, a pale female with wide glassy eyes, didn't make a sound. As they trudged back toward the Humvee, Hawk glanced once more at the tree. 3 tiny lives, tied down and forgotten. Not anymore. By the time the sandstorm gave up its rage, the sun had fallen low and bruised the horizon violet and gold. 2 miles east of the old mining town in Sierra County sat a temporary marine outpost, nothing more than tents, containers, and a rust-streaked prefab unit that passed for a medical bay. The Humvee rolled in coughing dust, its metal hide muted by grit. When Hawk killed the engine, silence rushed in, heavy and strange. Each man climbed out slowly, each carrying a fragile weight. The pups didn't stir. Their little bodies hung limp in the folds of their makeshift wraps, breathing shallowly. Hawk held the dark male who'd locked eyes with him beneath the Joshua tree, the one with one ear folded over. "Ranger," Hawk murmured softly. "You're a fighter." Taylor emerged next, cradling the sandy-colored pup with a torn ear. "This one's Dusty," he said, shaking his head. "Because that's all he is." Noah came last, the smallest female curled in his arms. Her fur was pale, her ribs sharp as fingers. She hadn't made a sound since they found her. "June," he whispered. "She looks like she belongs to the month that forgot to start." Inside the operations tent, the air felt thick and dim. A few Marines worked quietly behind plastic dividers, the light casting their shapes like ghosts on the walls. Hawk and his team went straight to their corner, 2 cots, a desk, and a med crate that smelled faintly of iodine and sweat. "I'll boil water," Taylor said, already setting Dusty down on a folded blanket. Noah knelt beside June, peeling off his jacket to wrap her tighter. "She's not even shivering," he murmured. "She's alive," Hawk replied, lowering beside him. "That's where we start." The dogs hardly moved as the men worked. Taylor, whose hands were built for wrenches, found a gentler precision as he cleaned a deep gash on Dusty's ear. He threaded a needle with black suture and began stitching, muttering under his breath. "Don't move, gremlin." Noah filled a small syringe with rehydration fluid and slid the needle carefully under June's thin skin. She whimpered softly but didn't open her eyes. He smoothed her fur and whispered, "It's okay, baby girl. You're safe now." The tent flap slapped open. Lieutenant Curtis Voss stepped in, tall, wiry, face drawn tight as a wire. His uniform looked untouched by dirt, his boots gleamed even in the storm's aftermath. "What the hell is this?" His voice was ice. Hawk rose slowly. "Rescue, sir. We found them tied under a Joshua tree." Voss looked down at the bundles on the floor, confusion giving way to irritation. "We're not a damn animal shelter, Staff Sergeant. No, sir, Hawk said evenly. But they were dying. Voss crossed his arms. You realize this violates field protocol. They're just pups, Noah muttered, not lifting his eyes. Pups don't feed our positions, Voss shot back. They don't take orders. Taylor didn't look up from his stitching. Neither does the supply chain, sir. The air went still. Voss stared at him long enough to make everyone hold their breath, then exhaled sharply. You've got 48 hours. After that, animal control in Las Cruces takes them. We're not hauling pets to base. He left before anyone could speak. The quiet he left behind was heavier than the storm. Hawk finally said, 48 hours. We make them count. That night, the desert froze. Temperatures dropped below 40, and the cold slithered in through every seam and zipper. But in the small tent, there was warmth, blankets layered thick, steady hands at work, and 3 men unwilling to give up. Taylor stayed up late, dabbing Dusty's wounds and cleaning sand from his paws. When the pup growled faintly, Taylor grinned. Yeah, you're stubborn. You'll live. Noah didn't sleep at all. He sat cross-legged on the floor, June in his lap, feeding her a few drops of glucose water every hour. His eyelids fluttered but never closed. From his cot, Hawk watched them both, Ranger curled up against his thigh, the pup's shallow breath syncing with his own. Hawk pulled out a creased photograph from his pocket, a boy in worn overalls sitting beside an old police dog. Different life. Same feeling. By dawn, June stirred. Her tiny head lifted. She licked Noah's thumb once, then sighed. Noah's breath caught, half a sob, half a prayer. By the second morning, the pups were part of the camp. Tiny shadows flitting between boots and cots, wrapped in surplus towels, sleeping under heat lamps Taylor had wired together from broken lanterns and a scavenged battery converter. The desert had gone eerily quiet, no wind, no storm, just the crackle of radios and the hum of recovery. Their home was a corner fenced by cardboard walls cut from old boxes, a small kingdom of 3 lives on borrowed time. June, the smallest, weighed barely 5 pounds. Her fur, almost white, dulled to gray near her belly. She blinked slow hazel eyes whenever someone whispered her name. On day 2, she tried to stand. Her hind legs quivered like reeds in the wind. Twice she collapsed. On the 3rd try, she managed 3 shaky steps, straight into Hawk's boot. He knelt. She pressed her head against his shin. From then on, whenever Hawk spoke, June's ears perked, and she'd inch toward him. Velcro girl, Taylor said dryly. She's glued to you. Hawk smiled faintly. Could be worse things to stick to. Ranger had claimed Noah, alert, curious, following him everywhere like a shadow. Dusty lingered near Taylor's cot, limping less now but still mischievous, chewing cords, stealing socks, dragging a spoon across the floor like a trophy. Watch that one, Taylor muttered. He's a menace. Which makes you what? Noah teased. His partner in crime. His handler, Taylor said, but his hand lingered on the pup's head, gentle and sure. Breakfast became a ritual, biscuits crushed into powder, mixed with warm water and protein gel until thin enough for tiny jaws. June still needed to be hand-fed with a syringe, but Ranger and Dusty were already jostling for the first bites. Training began that same afternoon, not orders, just connection. Ranger, Hawk called softly. The pup paused, ears high. Come. When he moved an inch closer, Hawk smiled. Good boy. Taylor used clicks and short commands for Dusty, sit. Here. Noah worked with June patiently, setting her on a towel, whispering, touch, as he pressed his palm to the floor. June blinked, then nudged his wrist with her nose. You're a genius, Taylor muttered. Noah grinned. Just giving her something to want. That evening, Hawk sat at his small folding desk, paper damp from the desert air. His handwriting was rough, but the words were careful. Hey Ellie. It's been months, but I found something out here that reminded me of you, or maybe of us. 3 German Shepherd pups, tied up in a storm. They're scraped up but hanging on. One's got deep rope burns, skin looks like it forgot how to be skin. You'd know what to do. If you can, send supplies or protocol notes. We've got 48 hours before the brass moves them out. Love, Micah. He folded it, sealed it, and marked it for the next outgoing convoy. Noah walked in, June tucked under his arm. Writing your will, Sarge. Letter to my sister, Hawk said. She's a vet in Flagstaff. Been a while since we talked. That where you're from? No, he paused. That's just where I learned what it meant to stay. He took June gently from Noah. The pup curled into the crook of his arm without protest. Permission to enter, a voice called. Sergeant Madison Trujillo, quartermaster, mid-30s, sturdy, calm, eyes like warm earth, stepped inside. Her bun was tight enough to survive combat. You weren't kidding, she said, spotting the pups. Heard about the 3 miracles. They're scruffier in person. Thanks, Taylor muttered. Trujillo crouched beside Dusty, who sniffed her suspiciously. They're healing. They're holding on, Hawk said. She nodded. Alive's half the battle. Need extra blankets? I can spare some. Just don't tell Voss. We won't, Noah grinned. That night, the tent glowed orange from the repurposed lamps. The pup slept warm, Ranger curled beside Noah, Dusty under Taylor's cot, June pressed against Hawk's sleeping bag. Outside, the desert cooled. Inside, for the first time since the storm, there were no whimpers, no cries. Only 3 tiny tails, steady in the dark. That night, the desert turned hostile again, not with wind or sand, but with silence and metal. Once the sun sank behind the copper-tinted mountains, the temperature plummeted. The camp froze beneath a sheet of hard, starlit blue. The generator outside had stalled at dusk, and now a single kerosene lamp flickered in the logistics tent. Its flame threw trembling shadows across the canvas, stretching and curling like ghosts on parade. Inside, the pups were bundled on a pallet of towels under an army-issue tarp. The warmth from the heat lamps had faded when a coil in Taylor's wiring burned out, another job for morning. June slept wedged between Dusty and Ranger, her small chest rising in rhythm, her body finally at peace. Hawk sat cross-legged on the ground, polishing his combat knife more out of habit than need. The motion calmed him, repetitive, precise, like breathing through memory. Across from him, Taylor had a radio transmitter spread out on a towel, gears and screws lined neatly in rows. He chewed a piece of peppermint gum as he worked, muttering every now and then when a screw rolled away. The tent was quiet, too quiet. Then the generator outside coughed once, and screamed. It wasn't a normal startup. It howled metal on metal, then roared so loud it shook the walls. The effect was instant. Ranger bolted upright, ears flat, eyes wild. He leapt into the air, barking sharp and frantic. Dusty joined in, spinning in circles, his bark breaking into yelps. But June didn't bark. She froze. Then shot across the floor like a bullet, straight into the nearest shadow, Taylor's rucksack. She crawled inside and vanished. Noah was already on his knees. Hey, it's okay, he whispered, voice trembling. I'm right here. Ranger's barking grew ragged. He was running in loops, bumping into crates, tail tucked tight. Hawk stood fast and caught the pup mid-run, holding him firmly against his chest. Easy, he murmured, one big hand pressing over the pup's heart. Taylor scooped Dusty into his lap, whispering soft curses under his breath while stroking the pup's ears until the shaking slowed. Noah reached into the rucksack. Come on, June. It's just noise. It's okay. But she had wedged herself into the deepest corner, trembling so hard he could feel it through the fabric. And that's when Noah broke. He sank down beside the bag, his back to a crate, eyes glazed in the flickering lamplight. "I hate that sound," he whispered hoarsely. "That metal crash. I can't stand it." Hawk glanced over, still holding Ranger tight. "You okay, son?" Noah's jaw trembled. He shook his head. "It sounds like the day my dad died." The room went still. Even Dusty stopped moving. "I was 8, Noah said quietly. He worked construction. I was across the street when the scaffolding collapsed. Metal tearing, crashing, exactly like that generator." He rubbed his face with his sleeve. "After that, every loud noise, I'd hide under my bed. Grandma called it my quiet corner. She even put a nightlight under there. Said no one could touch me in that space." No one spoke. The only sound was the soft rasp of the desert wind outside. Then Taylor, still holding Dusty, reached into his tool pouch, fished out a small LED light, and tossed it gently toward Noah. "Put that in your new corner." Noah blinked, then gave a broken laugh. "Thanks, man." He clicked it on and set it inside the rucksack. The light glowed soft and steady. June stirred at the glow, her eyes catching the reflection, and slowly crept out. She climbed halfway into Noah's lap, curling into him, trembling but no longer hiding. Hawk knelt beside them, Ranger still pressed to his chest. "Noise like that," he said quietly, "it cuts through things you thought you buried." Dusty, calmer now, pushed his head against Taylor's chest. The corporal sighed, running his hand through the pup's fur. "Back of my dad's garage," he said softly. "That was my quiet corner. Smelled like grease and old metal. No yelling there." The lamp flickered again, dimming to an amber glow. Hawk looked down at Ranger, now calm, his small tail twitching in sleep. "We'll figure it out," Hawk murmured. "You 3, you've got a squad now. We don't leave anyone behind." Noah nodded, stroking June's back. "We'll teach you the sounds," Hawk continued. "Which ones to fear, and which ones to trust." Taylor leaned back against a crate, folding his arms, Dusty sprawled across his chest. "Guess that makes us their ghosts." Hawk shook his head. "No. We're their pack." And for a long moment, no one spoke. 5 souls sat in that tent, men and dogs bound by fear, loss, and the fragile warmth of belonging. Outside, the desert wind softened to a whisper, and for the first time in a long while, the night forgot how to rage. The next morning rose with a gentleness rare for the desert. The sky stretched pale gold, the air crisp and cool, as if the land itself had decided to grant a truce. Camp stirred quietly, boots crunching gravel, coffee hissing on stoves, a radio muttering lazy static in the mess tent. Inside the logistics tent, the pups were already awake. Dusty was gnawing on the corner of a sock, tail thudding softly. June pawed at Hawk's pant leg until he scooped her into his arms, her small head resting under his chin. Ranger sat alert near the crate's shadow, watchful, proud, like he understood the weight of a new day. For the first time, the camp didn't feel temporary. Then came the knock, 2 quiet taps on the tent frame. Hawk turned. A figure stood outlined in the morning light, the kind that makes everything look carved in amber. She stepped inside, a woman in her late 40s with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of cedar bark. Her ranger fatigues were faded from years in the field, and a braid streaked with gray fell over one shoulder. A utility belt hung loose at her hip, tools and keys clinking softly as she moved. "Staff Sergeant Redford," she asked, her voice calm but deliberate. Hawk rose. "That's me." She extended a hand. "Cora Lynn. State Forestry and Wildlife Division. Got a report yesterday, something about 3 German Shepherd pups tied up out in the storm. Thought I'd see for myself." Taylor, carrying a canteen of warm broth, froze mid-step. Someone reported us. Cora smiled faintly. Not you. The pups. Someone called the county office. Said they'd heard cries during the sandstorm and saw military vehicles after. Word travels fast out here. We didn't take them, Noah said quickly, standing beside June. We found them. I figured. Cora's voice softened. She crouched down near the makeshift bedding, moving slow so she wouldn't startle them. Dusty sniffed her fingers once, tail wagging. Ranger stood tall but calm. June blinked up from Noah's lap, unafraid. Cora looked them over carefully, not like a stranger inspecting property, but like someone reading a story written in scars. They're in better shape than I expected, she said finally. Thanks to him, Hawk nodded toward Noah. Gentle hands. And him, Noah added, nodding toward Taylor. Field medic, sort of. Cora smiled knowingly. Sort of's good enough when it works. She brushed June's fur aside gently to look at the faint scarring around her belly. Her brow furrowed. These were deep, she murmured. Tied tight. Whoever did this wanted them still. Training accident? Taylor asked, though his voice carried more anger than curiosity. Could be, she replied. Backyard breeders sometimes tie pups too early, think fear teaches obedience. When it doesn't, they dump them. Sometimes in woods. Sometimes in worse places. A long silence followed. Do they match any missing reports? Hawk asked quietly. Cora pulled a small notepad from her vest, flipping it open. There's one from a few towns over. A breeder reported 7 shepherd pups stolen. But the neighbors say otherwise. She tapped her pen. Only 3 were ever found. Noah clenched his jaw. So he just left them to die. Probably, Cora said simply. And unless someone steps forward, the law can't do much. Taylor looked down at Dusty, who had pressed his muzzle into his hand. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. He reminds me of a dog I had. Back when my parents were splitting. He was the only thing that made sense. Slept under my bed every night. Never barked, just stayed close. Cora looked at him quietly, then nodded. Dogs carry things same as we do, she said. They just don't talk about it. She stood and dusted off her knees. You've done right by them. Don't let anyone tell you different. Will there be a report? Hawk asked. I'll file it clean, Cora said. Unofficially, they're strays. Officially, they're yours, unless I hear otherwise. She turned to leave, then paused at the flap. If you need supplies, go through the ranger station in Hatch. Ask for my cousin Felix. He owes me one. They watched her step out into the sunlight, the desert wind tugging at her braid. Hell of a woman, Taylor muttered. Hell of a morning, Noah said softly. That evening, the horizon bled orange as the sun dropped behind the rock ridges. The camp seemed quieter than usual, touched by a stillness that wasn't empty, more like contentment. Hawk stood near the perimeter, hands deep in his pockets, watching the pups sleep in a single curled heap of warmth. June nestled between Ranger and Dusty, their breathing slow and even. He pulled out his notebook and wrote a single line, meant for his sister. They're not just surviving. They're remembering. And somehow, so are we. The wind moved gently across the camp, soft enough to carry the scent of dust and coffee, strong enough to remind him they were still alive. The town of Hatch, New Mexico, clung to the desert like a stubborn memory. A handful of weathered buildings, sun-bleached signs, and old rails that hadn't seen a train in years. The kind of place the world forgets until it needs something, like hope, or help. By the time the Marine's Humvee rumbled down the dusty main road, the air shimmered with heat. Noon had bleached the sky pale white, and the asphalt rippled like water. Taylor drove this time, his elbow hanging out the window, Dusty sitting upright beside him on the passenger seat like a co-pilot. Every bump made the pup's ears flop, and Taylor smiled, the rare kind that softened his entire face. In the back, Noah held June gently in his lap, whispering to her every so often. Her fur had grown softer, her eyes brighter, though her ribs still showed faintly beneath the downy coat. Ranger rode beside Hawk in the front seat, tethered loosely with a piece of old cargo strap. The pup's gaze moved constantly, scanning the landscape like he was on watch. "Still doesn't feel real," Noah murmured, looking out the window at the endless desert. "What doesn't?" Hawk asked. "That we found them. That they made it. That we made it." Hawk nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching into the smallest smile. "Some things aren't meant to make sense, kid. They're meant to mean something." They pulled up outside a small cinderblock building wedged between a grain silo and a diner with a flickering neon sign that read "Open, sometimes." The white paint was peeling. The windows were clouded with dust. And yet, on the wall above the door, a hand-painted sign read in fading green: "Sagebrush Veterinary Field Station." The moment they opened the door, the scent hit them, antiseptic, sawdust, and something faintly medicinal. Behind the counter stood a young woman in her late 20s, freckles scattered across her cheeks, auburn hair tied up in a loose, messy bun that bobbed every time she spoke. Her green vest bore an embroidered cactus and a stitched name tag, Brinley. "Afternoon," she said brightly. "You must be the ones Cora called about." "That's us," Hawk said with a nod. Brinley's eyes softened when she saw the pups. "So these are the storm survivors." "That's what we're calling them," Noah said. "Well," she smiled, "you brought them to the right place. Doc's been expecting you." She led them through a curtained doorway into a small examination room, the kind that looked built from leftover supply crates. Metal table in the center, charts pinned to plywood walls, a whiteboard with names and check marks scribbled in dry erase marker. Moments later, the door opened again, and Dr. Elias Morton walked in. He was in his mid-50s, tall but slightly stooped, his hair gray at the temples and his beard dusted with copper. Square glasses rested low on his nose. He wore a khaki shirt tucked into faded jeans, the sleeves rolled to his elbows. "Morning, gentlemen," he said, his voice steady and unhurried. "I'm Elias. I hear you've brought me 3 miracles on 4 paws." "Something like that," Hawk said quietly. Elias smiled faintly. "Let's have a look, then." He started with Dusty. The pup wagged his tail hesitantly but didn't resist. Brinley held him steady while Elias checked his eyes, gums, paws, and joints. "Scar tissues forming clean," the vet murmured. "No fractures. Tendons bruised, but healing. Ear'll stay folded, but he's lucky." Taylor scratched Dusty's head proudly. "Told you, tough guy." Next was June. She stayed completely still, not fighting, not flinching, just watching. Noah sat beside her, whispering to keep her calm. Elias brushed his fingers gently along the faint rope scars around her belly. His eyes softened. "These weren't random," he said quietly. "Whoever tied her knew what they were doing. They wanted her immobile." He sighed, shaking his head. "This one's been through hell. It'll take time, not just for the skin to heal, but the mind." Finally, Ranger. The pup stood taller, calmer, more grounded than the others. Elias ran a scanner over his neck. No microchip, no tags. Clean. He looked up at Hawk. 7, maybe 8 weeks old. Malnourished, yes, but you've turned that around. What'll take longer is the trust. Noah nodded. They still flinch when voices get loud. Ranger barks in his sleep. June crawls under things when it's noisy. Elias met his gaze. You've given them safety. That's step 1. They'll return the favor when they're ready. Hawk crossed his arms. We want to make it official. Keep them. Elias studied him for a beat, then nodded. Then we start paperwork. Brinley, he called. Print 3 temporary custody forms. I'll vouch as medical witness. Brinley disappeared through the curtain. You 3 all from the same unit? Elias asked. Same squad, Hawk said. Found them on recon. Storm still coming? Elias asked. Taylor smirked faintly. Always. 10 minutes later, the forms were ready. The printer sputtered and clicked in the next room, spitting out pages that smelled of warm ink and dust. Elias laid them on the table. Sign here, here, and here. Ranger, Dusty, June. One by one, Hawk, Taylor, and Noah signed their names. Congratulations, Elias said. You're officially their handlers. Or maybe their family. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Brinley returned, handing Hawk a sealed envelope. That's your copy. If anyone questions it, send them our way. Thank you, Hawk said, tucking it into his jacket. As they stepped outside, the desert light met them again, softer now, almost forgiving. Ranger trotted at Hawk's heel without the strap. Dusty bounded ahead toward the Humvee, leaping at the tire like it was a game. June slept in Noah's arms, her breath slow and even. Taylor leaned against the truck, looking out at the horizon. We left with survivors, he said quietly. Hawk nodded. We're going back with family. The air shifted before anyone saw the clouds. It was subtle, the way the sunlight dulled at the edges, the way the flies disappeared, the way even the radios went quiet. Staff Sergeant Hawk stood at the perimeter line, scanning the western ridge. He could taste the change before it arrived, that faint metallic dust, the breath the desert takes before it screams. Behind him, Taylor was tightening the bolts on the comms antenna, a wrench hanging from his hand. Storm, he called. Yeah, Hawk replied. Coming fast. From inside the sleeping tent, Noah stumbled out, rubbing his eyes. Thought we weren't due for another one. Desert doesn't do schedules, Taylor muttered, tossing the wrench aside. They moved quickly, tightening flaps, covering water drums, securing the generator that now hummed quietly thanks to Taylor's makeshift muffler. The sky had turned the color of rusted copper. Inside the logistics tent, the pups were restless. June was curled by Noah's cot, chewing softly on the edge of a blanket. Ranger stood at the tent flap, ears sharp, tail stiff, alert like a soldier on watch. Dusty hid under the work table, one eye tilted toward the light breaking through the seams. By 2:13 p.m., the first gust slammed into camp. It came heavy, not violent at first, just dense. Like the air itself had gained weight. Then came the roar. Sand whipped across the desert, bending the tents, rattling the frames. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The world turned to fire-colored haze. Inside, shouts cut through the wind. Secure the generator. Double the ropes. Hawk bolted for the outer barrier, scarf pulled high, eyes squinted against the storm. The sand stung like glass. Then he heard it. A bark, sharp, urgent, echoing through the chaos. Then another. Ranger. Hawk shouted, turning toward the sleeping tent. Inside, Noah had been half asleep, caught in that strange limbo between dream and memory. He didn't hear the first bark, nor the second. The storm had ripped the back flap open, sand clawing through the gap. But Dusty heard it. The pup darted through the side seam, barking like mad. Ranger stood outside, his small body braced against the wind, his paws sinking into the dirt as the storm whipped around him. June tried to follow but froze halfway, whining, her fur pressed flat against her skin. Noah's eyes shot open. Dusty was in his face, barking loud and sharp. He blinked, disoriented, then heard June's cry. Ranger, he yelled. The storm nearly swallowed his voice. Ranger turned his head just enough for Noah to see him, standing firm between the open flap and June, shielding her from the blast. "Hold on!" Noah shouted, diving from the cot. Hawk rounded the corner at full sprint just as the wind tore another seam open. Without hesitating, he lunged forward, arms outstretched, grabbing both pups in one sweep. Ranger and June pressed against his chest as he rolled back into the tent. Taylor appeared next, half blind in the sandstorm, scooping Dusty into his arms mid-run. "Got him!" Taylor yelled over the wind. Inside, Hawk crouched low, shielding Ranger and June beneath his body. The storm raged above them, howling like a living thing. "They didn't run," Noah said, breathless, staring in disbelief. "They didn't hide." "No," Hawk said, voice steady even in the chaos. "They stood their ground. They waited, 20 minutes of fury." The generator sputtered once but held steady. The sand screamed across the canvas, then slowly, painfully, began to fade. When the world finally settled, the camp was half buried in dust. The air inside the tent was thick and dry. Hawk brushed grit from Ranger's ears, checking his breathing. "Normal," he muttered. "No shaking." Noah sat with June in his lap, her fur coated in fine sand. "She's calm," he said softly. "Didn't panic this time." She trusted him. Taylor glanced down at Dusty, who was panting heavily but wagging his tail, one paw resting on Taylor's boot. Taylor leaned in and whispered something to the pup, his voice almost lost under the hum of settling wind. The desert had tested them again, and this time, it wasn't the men who proved their courage. It was the dogs. Later that evening, as the camp settled back into its fragile rhythm, the Marines gathered around the cook heater. Dinner was humble, instant rice and rehydrated beans, but it tasted like peace. The pups sprawled near their feet, half asleep, twitching occasionally as if still chasing the wind in their dreams. The sound of boots on gravel made them look up. Someone was approaching from the west perimeter, a silhouette walking slow, careful. It wasn't common to get visitors out here. The man that appeared through the twilight was tall and wiry, wrapped in a worn denim jacket over a faded flannel shirt. A thick white beard covered most of his face, and his eyes, pale blue, sharp but kind, reflected the last orange light of sunset. He walked with a carved wooden stick that had a snake etched down its length. "Evenin'," he said, voice low, gravelly. Hawk stepped forward. "You lost?" The man shook his head. "Name's Franklin. Heard from a friend up in Hatch. Said you boys have got some young shepherds." The air in the tent tightened, alert, cautious. "I ain't here to cause trouble," Franklin said quickly, raising a hand. "I just figured, maybe I owed it to someone to tell what I saw." He crouched near the fire, eyes glinting under his brimmed hat. "There's a kennel, or what used to be one, out near Mesa Ridge. Not official. Fella ran it like some kind of backwater training ring. I haul grain past there every week." He paused. "Last time I went by, there were pups. 4, maybe 5. Tied under a mesquite tree. Week later, they were gone." He looked at Dusty, then June, then Ranger, each in turn. "They looked like those ones." Taylor's jaw tightened. "Did you report it?" "Tried," Franklin said, shaking his head. "But out here, unless you've got a badge or a crowd, you're just another echo in the wind. I figured maybe God had a better plan for M. Maybe that plan was you." No one spoke for a long time. The fire cracked, faint and steady. Finally, Franklin stood, brushing dust off his jeans. "If anyone comes looking, say they were born wild. Or saved by ghosts. Don't matter which. Just keep M safe." He nodded once and turned toward the darkness, the head of his carved cane leaving snake-shaped tracks in the sand. The men watched him fade into the desert, silent. The pup stirred, pressing closer to the fire's glow. Hawk reached down, brushing his hand across Ranger's head. "Ghosts or not," he said quietly, "we're keeping them." Taylor exhaled slowly. "That's not a plan, that's a promise." And for the first time since the desert had turned against them, they all believed it. The next morning rose clean and sharp, the kind of desert dawn that feels like forgiveness. The sky was endless and blue again, scrubbed clear by the storm's rage. The air carried the scent of wet dust and cooling metal. The camp hummed quietly. No shouting, no chaos, just the sound of boots crunching gravel and coffee bubbling over a small heater. Hawk stepped out of the logistics tent with a clipboard in one hand and a steaming tin mug in the other. The sun hit the edge of his cap, turning his shadow long and lean across the ground. Behind him, Noah and Taylor followed, each flanked by one of the pups. Ranger trotted at the front like he'd earned rank overnight, tail high, head swiveling from left to right. Dusty limped a little, but stronger than before, his stride almost confident. And June walked close to Noah's heel, her pace slow but steady, her gaze calm. Noah smiled as he looked down at her. "She doesn't flinch anymore," he said softly. "She learned what safe sounds like," Hawk replied. At the edge of camp, near the refueling station, a convoy vehicle idled. Standing beside it was Sergeant Linda Cho, base admin officer, a lean woman in her late 30s with cropped black hair and a face shaped by command. She was all precision, from her pressed uniform to the way she held a clipboard like a weapon. But when she saw the three pups, her expression softened into something close to a smile. "You sure about this, Staff Sergeant?" she asked, extending a small folder. "Yeah," Hawk said, taking it. "We're not temporary anymore." Cho nodded slowly. "You understand the commitment, they'll be under your names, your responsibility, both in and out of uniform." Taylor crossed his arms, a rare grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Already are. We filed under non-civilian animal protection," Noah added. "Technically, they're military dependents now." Cho's eyebrow lifted. "That's creative." "Approved?" Hawk asked. Cho smiled faintly. "Approved." She flipped open the final page and handed them an ink pad. Hawk pressed his thumb into it and stamped the paper. Taylor followed. Then Noah. And just like that, it was done. They were no longer rescues. They were family. 2 days later, word got out. A dusty blue Subaru rolled into camp from the main road, carrying a woman in a tan-field vest crammed with pens, notebooks, and a weather-beaten camera bag. Her name was Callie Mendoza, a local journalist from the Hatch County Gazette. She'd heard rumors about 3 Marines, a sandstorm, and a trio of shepherd pups that refused to die. Callie was in her mid-40s, her smile warm but her eyes sharp, the kind of reporter who listened more than she asked. She found the Marines sitting outside the mess tent, mugs of coffee in hand, the dogs at their feet. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. Hawk gestured to the bench beside them. "Pull up a seat." Callie settled in, flipping open a small notebook. "So, tell me. What made you keep them?" Hawk didn't hesitate. "Because they weren't just rescued, they rescued us back." Taylor leaned forward, scratching Dusty behind the ear. "They came broken," he said. "Didn't stay that way." "Neither did we." Noah smiled faintly. "They made us a family. I didn't even know I needed one." Callie nodded, jotting notes. Her questions were few after that, she let silence tell most of the story. Before she left, she took photos. June resting her head on Noah's boot. Dusty dragging a wrench beside Taylor's toolbox like a prize. Ranger sitting straight-backed at the supply tent entrance, the picture of discipline. A week later, her article hit the front page. 3 soldiers, 3 dogs, 3 second chances. Donations began arriving within days, dog food, medical kits, harnesses, even homemade toys. A retired K-9 officer sent a care package with 3 hand-stitched collars. One had Ranger embossed in leather. Another, Dusty, burned into wood grain. And the last, small and delicate, read June, found in the storm. Even headquarters noticed, an email from the Public Affairs Division calling it a morale story worth remembering. Taylor muttered, "Guess we're famous now." Hawk only smiled. "Not us. Them." One afternoon, when the mail run dropped off new supplies, Hawk disappeared behind the supply shed with his pocketknife and a block of mesquite wood. When he returned an hour later, he carried a sign, edges sanded smooth, letters carved deep by hand. He nailed it above the entrance of the logistics tent. It read, "They were once tied down. Now they've tied us together." That evening, the sky melted into gold. June and Ranger chased each other across the hard-packed dirt, their paws kicking up soft clouds that glittered in the sunset. Dusty sat near Taylor's pack, head high, standing guard like it mattered. The three Marines sat side by side on overturned crates, tin mugs in their hands, watching the horizon fade from orange to violet. None of them spoke much. They didn't need to. The quiet wasn't the hollow kind anymore, it was the kind that settles in after the noise of survival has finally ended. The camp, once a place of storms, had become something else entirely, a home. No one knew what orders would come next. Rotations, deployments, new missions, it didn't matter. Whatever waited beyond the dunes, they'd face it together. 3 soldiers. 3 dogs. 1 family. Sometimes miracles don't come in thunder or light. Sometimes they arrive on 4 shaky legs, with rope scars on their bellies and eyes still brave enough to trust. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a reminder that love still finds its way through the dust, that healing begins with a small act of compassion, and that God often sends the right souls at the right time, whether they wear uniforms or wag their tails. If you've ever felt forgotten, tied down by fear, grief, or silence, remember this. You're not alone. And like Ranger, Dusty, and June, your smallest act of kindness might save more than one life. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Comment where you're watching from. Or just type "Amen" if you believe that hope still walks among us, sometimes on 2 feet, sometimes on 4. May God bless every wandering soul, every brave heart, and every broken thing waiting to be made whole.